Reality consists of an active, ongoing process of continuation, which is perpetually constrained by unbreakable physical and systemic rules across time. Every structure in the universe exists under the invisible, constant pressure of entropy. This is the universal force pushing everything toward fragmentation and disorder. Without active maintenance, any complex system, whether it's a biological organism, a corporate institution, or an entire civilization, will naturally degrade. Persistence requires a constant input of energy and care to resist this drift toward decay. This raises a fundamental problem for any enduring structure. If the default state of the universe is fragmentation, how does any complex system manage to survive across long stretches of time? The answer lies in the axiom of admissibility. This principle establishes that a path does not deserve to become reality simply because it is possible or because a force has the power to take it. Instead, a path only becomes admissible when it justifies its own continuation. It must remain supportable and aligned with reality without transferring an unmanageable burden to the systems that sustain it. The physical survival of any complex system depends entirely on the specific rules it follows to resist fragmentation. To survive the test of time, these operational rules must function as rigid engineering constraints, ensuring the system remains coherent under pressure. Time acts as the ultimate filter. It functions as the active arena where the viability of every system is continuously verified under pressure. While flawed systems might appear momentarily, enduring continuation requires a level of accumulated structural depth that can only be built through repeated survival. Long-term survival depends on truth alignment. This is the requirement that a system's internal models and actions remain strictly responsive to real-world consequences. Truth provides the necessary moral infrastructure for persistence. It is the data input that allows a system to detect errors and execute the repairs required to prevent total collapse. We can model this necessity through the ethical truth criterion. These variables define the exact conditions required for an admissible truth practice. For a system to remain stable, it requires RA for reality alignment, HC for honest communication, and CR for correction readiness. These components lock together to form a foundation that can process external feedback. When a system employs deception or denies evidence, the internal clusters disconnect. They turn red and vibrate erratically, signaling that the system is no longer capable of stabilizing itself against reality. Deception fragments the shared reality of an organization. Without accurate data, internal actors lose the ability to coordinate, making the entire structure blind to the causes of its own decay. Eventually, the system encounters a reality override. Physical and systemic consequences will always supersede human preference, political status, or ideological comfort. A structure designed to ignore its own consequences eventually loses the capacity to repair its foundations. When reality finally overrides the model, the system lacks the structural integrity to survive the impact. Power functions as magnified consequence, a state where the actions of a single entity ripple outward to disrupt the entire system. A private mistake might damage a single life. However, an institutional lie corrupts the information network of an entire society, forcing thousands to live according to a falsehood. Because power scales consequence, the ethical constraints placed on an agent must increase proportionally with the scale of their reach. This accountability is built through the governance architecture sequence, mapping the necessary progression from raw capability to a stable ethical structure. Capability becomes authority only when it is role-bound. It must be contained by a strict boundary box that defines its purpose and limits its scope to the service of the system. Leadership then carries the burden of coordinating collective agency. This requires mapping downward-pointing distribution lines to account for every burden the leader's decisions place on the people beneath them. Finally, governance provides the independent oversight that locks the entire sequence into a stable shape. It ensures that authority and leadership remain answerable to the consequences they produce. When this sequence fails to hold power accountable, the system collapses into domination. Domination occurs when power preserves itself by actively weakening the agency, dignity, or truth access of those affected by it. It views the people it governs as tools for its own expansion. In this state, conscious human beings are converted into continuation fuel. They are consumed to sustain the leader's ego, reputation, or the survival of a broken institutional model. Unchecked power is structurally unstable. By weakening its own participants to survive, domination hollows out the very foundations required to support the weight of the system. To maintain stability, a system must practice correction ethics. When a mismatch with reality is detected, the agent has a moral duty to execute a correction proportional to the potential harm. However, institutions often employ specific failure modes designed to create the appearance of oversight without the risk of actual correction. Performative audits are a primary example. These are reviews that create a public theater of accountability, while possessing no authority to enforce repairs or change the system's direction. Another failure is obstruction by verification. This occurs when leaders weaponize the demand for more proof, using endless studies and committees to delay the repairs reality is already demanding. The ultimate failure is dogmatism. This is a state where an ideology or policy is made completely immune to consequence, automatically rejecting all contradictory evidence to preserve the status quo. Every uncorrected error and silenced warning accumulates as maintenance debt. This debt represents the total amount of structural instability the system is choosing to ignore. Compounding debt eventually pushes the institution past its point of no return. The hidden instability reaches a threshold where the system can no longer adapt, leading to an unmanageable collapse. Verification and transparency are useless if the overarching architecture is structurally designed to reject the corrections that truth requires. Mortality represents the ultimate boundary for any system, the specific point where direct personal presence and action permanently cease. While death ends direct presence, it does not end the consequences of one's actions. The choices made during a life or the policies of an institution continue to shape the world. This leads to the practice of inheritance discernment. This is the process by which the future must decide which parts of the past are worth preserving and which must be repaired. This requires us to redefine legacy. If we set aside fame, ego, and monuments, legacy is revealed as the total field of support and burden left behind for others to inherit. Every generation passes its consequences forward, crossing the boundary of transmission. Wisdom and stable infrastructure cross over as foundational support. Unresolved deaths and dumped burdens drop as destabilizing blocks. A meaning-bearing legacy requires handing forward support while actively reducing future burden. The ultimate value of any life or institution is found in its resulting ratio, the amount of structural support it hands forward compared to the avoidable burden it dumps on the future. Repairing a harmful systemic pattern, ensuring that an inherited wound stops with you, is one of the highest possible acts of legacy. Meaningful existence emerges through responsible participation in reality, building a coherent continuation that preserves the foundations required for the future to exist.